Florida drug dealer made a serious mistake when he dared peddle his poisons on the schoolyard of Robert W. Morgan's preteen daughter. Morgan, a budding film director, tracked him to his hidden Everglades lair where his meth lab mysteriously blew sky high. When Morgan's demands to police to make grammar school playgrounds safer from drugs were ignored, he sought the counsel of CIA operative Frank Sturgis. Again, he was warned to give up what was becoming an obsession. Instead, Robert used his reputation as a filmmaker to infiltrate the mafia by stroking their egos and offering to make films for them offshore so they could import them as foreign product without paying taxes. When they agreed to build him a studio in Panama, Robert called the DEA and FBI and offered to work undercover. In time, their combined efforts revealed how the mob was secretly laundering billions of dollars through the Vatican Bank in Rome before returning to the States as foreign investments. Now read Morgan's story, Citizen Spy, Vatican Cover-Up, The Mob, Money Laundering, and Murder, available at Amazon.com, BN.com, and Borders.com. In the world today, most people want what is called the American dream. They want love, a family, a fancy car, and a nice home in a nice neighborhood. They also want a good job and money to travel to interesting places. Life is great because they have the American dream. But what happens to this dream if they hear they have a devastating illness like lung cancer? The doctor may tell them they need treatment immediately or they will be dead in 6 months. He tells them you need surgery and then you need chemotherapy to get better. When they get home, they think of many unanswered questions. They ask themselves, will I survive when so many of my friends with cancer have died? How will I deal with the pain, hair loss, nausea and vomiting, sore mouth and other side effects of chemotherapy and pain of surgery? Will I be able to keep on working? What will happen to my family? Then they look at the internet and wonder, is there a better way to deal with lung cancer and return to my American dream? Carl Helvey can tell you yes, there is a better way. Carl Helvey is a registered nurse with a doctorate in public health and a 38-year lung cancer survivor. Carl was given 6 months to live when diagnosed, and he refused chemotherapy and surgery. Carl used alternative interventions. Those not only helped him overcome lung cancer, but also to remain cancer-free and healthy for over the past 36 years since recovery. In his book, You Can Beat Cancer Using Alternative Integrative Interventions, Dr. Helvey will tell you his story of using all-natural treatments for lung cancer and continuing to work during his treatment. Free of pain and discomfort, Carl will also share how he remained cancer and disease-free since then without chronic illnesses or prescribed medications. His story is supplemented with chapters by Dr. Bernie Siegel, Dr. Francesco Contreras, and Dr. James Forsyth, alternative integrative physicians, and Dr. Kim Dalzell and Tanya Harder-Pierce, health professionals. All have successfully helped others overcome cancer. Research presented by the alternative physicians on their treatments for lung cancer demonstrate a significantly higher long-term survival rate for lung cancer clients than those obtained by conventional doctors. In addition, their clients were free of or had reduced side effects. You Can Beat Lung Cancer Using Alternative Integrative Interventions by Dr. Carl Helvey is now available at all major book outlets and at www.beatlungcancer.net. That's www.beatlungcancer.net. This information may help you return to the American dream. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. thefutureofgodamen.com. Fartlets, fartlings, pongies, and honkers. They have so many names, makes you go bonkers. Rear tempest, butt bubbles, bottom burps, all aside. Why does it smell like a little rat died? Hail the fart, whenever, wherever, whoever. Its existence actually enriches our lives because it gives us those unforgettable moments that we can all recall again and again that are always good for yet another laugh. A new expose on farting. Get your copy of The Endearing Fart by Eileen Dover at www.theendearingfart.com.
Little children aren't the only ones afraid of the dark. Millions of soldiers return from war zones with PTSD, anger, frustration, fear, and loneliness, much of which surfaces during the darkness of the night. You have the chance to change the lives of these American heroes. Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us provides free MP3 players for these men and women. With a list of 3 million songs in 16 different styles, 100,000 audiobooks, and 30,000 old-time radio programs, every veteran can find something to soothe and comfort them at no cost. All our players contain an 8-hour audio program designed to help veterans fall asleep. With 1,500 plus vets now participating, it's our goal to deliver 10,000 audio players this year. Go to our website at songsandstoriesforsoldiers.us. Help us help a veteran make it through the night.
The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and around the world on the Starcom radio network. Worldwide toll-free, 800-610-7035, extension 0. My email address is xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And our main website, where you can listen to the X-Zone 724, 365, www.xzoneradiotv.com. We're going to be talking about autism this hour, X-Zone Nation. Our guest is John E. MICA. He is the author of The Autistic Holocaust, The Reason Our Children Keep Getting Sick. It's published by Trying Day. And John basically accuses the federal government of having a corrupt and morally unsound relationship with Big Pharma, first noting the dramatic rise in the cases of autism in the United States since the 1970s. The Autistic Holocaust then discusses the rampant misuse and dangers associated with vaccinations. Joining me now is John E. MICA. And John, welcome to the X-Zone. John, we can't hear you. John, we can't hear you. Just give us a sec. Our technicians are seeing if there's anything going on at this end. Craig, Master Control, can you see what's going on here?
How's that?
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Sorry. That's all
I had
right.
to turn it on. I got to be smarter than the equipment.
Oh, it's all right. You just gave one engineer, 2 producers a heart attack, and they deserve it at times. There you go. Reality check.
Excellent.
Hey, John, thanks very much for joining us. Tell me about the Autistic Holocaust, the reason our children keep getting sick.
Absolutely. Well, I have a son that's autistic, and actually he was diagnosed with autism when he was 28 years old. That was his diagnosis was confirmed at that age. Mm-hmm. He kind of slipped through the cracks, so to speak. And it actually was a situation where my relationship with him was very estranged because he went through a situation where it was a divorce, nasty situation.
Yeah.
That sort of complicated the whole situation because, here is a child that, I'm looking at as my son, and, I feel maybe I'm a bad father. Not sure what's wrong with my son. I noticed things when he was much younger, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age. Communicative problems, socialization problems, and behavioral problems. So I really didn't know. And back in the 70s and 80s, this thing wasn't such really well known, or
That's right.
Not much attention was brought to as it is now. And I had an opportunity through writing through my son. He was afraid of he didn't like his cursive writing. So he sort of discommunicated me. He was living with his primary caregiver, his mom. And I go on to tell about this in my book, along with some very interesting facts and figures and statistics. But anyway, as through helping my dad write a book, I focused on the Oversight Committee on Government Reform hearing, which focused on the raising rights of autism. 1 in 88, it was the prevalence rate for autism spectrum disorders in 2012. And I found out through doing a little more digging that, there was a lot of government sort of corruption or cover-up and malfeasance on the part of the Centers for Disease Control. And, you've got pharmaceutical companies working hand in hand to sway legislation. And, it's a very complicated process. And, the more I dug, the angrier I got. So, I started writing and digging more and more. And then I found out as, through the hearing and everything else, I found out spending 2 years of my life. And, I'm not a scientist. I want to clarify that. I'm not a researcher or doctor, but, I'm a concerned parent with an autistic child. And as I found out, my relationship with him grew through, doing a little digging on this book. And I've been in touch with many autistic children and family members of autistic children. And the reception I've got from writing this book has been just really sort of overwhelming. So, and so that's how I got started. It was my son that got it going. And as I got into it more and more, people that were, I guess I could say, for lack of a better word, far more intelligent than I, took a vested interest in what I was doing and sort of helped me along the way. And Trine Day was amazing. And I've got just a phenomenal scientific research editor who's an expert on many topics who assist me put this thing together. Came up with a phenomenal product. Easy to read. Anybody can understand it. And it's got information in it. And, read this book, 2 things you're going to come to a conclusion on. You're going to say, I didn't know that. And you know what? That makes a lot of sense.
All right, let's just go back and describe for our listeners what autism is, because we're talking about, 1 in 68 American children?
That's correct.
So let's let the other 67 people know what autism is.
Absolutely. Well, autism, by the way, is a neurological disorder. It affects a child or an adult's ability to communicate on a what I would call a successful level or a higher functioning level, and it can affect their socialization skills. As my son was afraid to leave the house for 5 years, and it can also affect their behavioral characteristics. And some children on that autism spectrum disorder scale, 2/3 of them will never lead a normal life, will require institutionalization and professional help and all kinds of services that they need simply to, adjust to the best of their ability. So, it's a situation where it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it's the greatest disorder. It's greater than all the developmental disorders combined. We talk about childhood cancer, juvenile diabetes, and pediatric AIDS. So, and this thing keeps getting growing more and more and more. It's the graph of it is linear and statistic. And what's really amazing, by the way, Rob, is that we don't even got to go back to 1980, or and you go back to the 70s, and it was one, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 children that were diagnosed with autism. It was not even recognized as a disorder until 1980. And the way we judge that standard is by the DSM in here, and maybe in Canada it's the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases. They have an edition equivalent to ours, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it wasn't even recognized until the 3rd edition in 1980 as infantile autism. And it's gone through some categorical umbrellaing and whatnot. And right now it's very hard to get an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. And the DSM-5 has really excluded Asperger's syndrome, which is a higher functioning level.
But wasn't Asperger's syndrome coined by, Dr. Hans Asperger in Germany? And there's a similarity to autism at the same time, and isn't autism and schizophrenia sometimes linked together by many researchers?
Well, again, I think you're talking about neurological disorders, and we can look at a whole litany of things in that regard. But when we're talking about a definition according to the DSM here in the United States, it did actually list as part of the autism spectrum disorder in 1994 text revised edition. It added Asperger's syndrome, as you mentioned, the doctor that brought that to attention, as somebody which is socially or communicatively impaired. Yeah. And these people were receiving services under that diagnosis, desperately needed services that were required so that they could lead the best lives to their ability. And now what we've looked at is a very constricting definition. There's no such thing as Asperger's disorder anymore. Everything falls under autism spectrum disorder.
Well, isn't Asperger's considered still by the medical community as being a lesser form of autism?
Correct. I would agree with that statement.
Yeah.
However, somebody with Asperger's can function normally. I'll give you an example. Now, my son told me when he was 14 that he was diagnosed with Asperger's. I'd never heard of it before. And, after doing all the research I could on it, people, by the way, people with autism, some people you'd look at and you'd say, you'd never even recognize they're autistic. And then you got to go all the way to the other end of the scale where there's people that, children that are 14, 15, 16 that maybe weigh 100 to 200 pounds, and, they headbutt, they kick, they scratch, they break bones, and they're uncontrollable. So you go from one end of the spectrum to the other, and 2/3 of the children actually are of the more severe type of this autism spectrum disorder, and that's what the CDC uses to determine autism spectrum disorder. And so actually they actually looked at everything, from Asperger's and everything.
But you also say that the CDC has been lying to the American people.
Oh, that's absolutely true. That's documented, and I bring instances of that in the book. They have gone through manipulation of, I'll go back to Simpsonwood. And through a FOIA request obtained by concerned parents, it was Dr. Boyle herself, who was assistant director of the CDC, and in a capacity she was, and she suggested to the director of the CDC to manipulate the data by including 1- and 2-year-olds into their studies to water down and make it look like there wasn't so much of an effect. And here's another thing. And we look at the Vaccine Safety Datalink. Now, this is a large pool of information that keeps track of all the shots, the reactions to the shots, and whatever, and shots with or without thimerosal, which was a huge concern not all that long ago, which is still in vaccines in the form of the flu shot today. Not all have it, but some do, and it's still administered even to pregnant women. And so, you've got the government. In some cases, I cite a couple studies and some PubMed studies in my book. I support everything I say with fact and with studies. These aren't things I just make up. I could spend several hours talking about things that aren't even in the book. But what I do is I address some of the things like you concern as far as government malfeasance, and let's look at a broader scale too. Let's look at what the pharmaceutical industry is tied into this, and let's look at the very laws that were established to protect these agencies. I mean, you look at the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which was established in 1986, and the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program in 1988 clearly stated that we could not sue these vaccine manufacturers for even if there was unavoidable side effects that resulted in injury or death due to administration of these drugs, and that was again. Snuck into a rider in the Homeland Security. And I'm sure you remember 9/11. Everybody does. I live here in the state of New York, and George Bush signed into law the Homeland Security Act. And within the Homeland Security Act was a rider that actually, under the red herring of national security, protected these vaccine manufacturers and went as far as to say, and reinforcing the vaccine injury compensation programs that said, even if it's due to willful neglect, in other words, even if that we are harmed purposefully, either through a bad lot and somebody dies or gets injured, we can't sue these vaccine manufacturers. So they're protected by law, by the government, and there's a fund for these people that's actually funded by the vaccine, they pay an excise tax. These vaccine manufacturers pay an excise tax for every manufactured vaccine. 75 cents per single shot, and trivalent or vaccines like measles, mumps, rubella, DTaP are charged $2.25, which go into a fund to compensate those victims of a vaccine injury. Now, the victims.
All right,
of a
but let me ask
injury,
you. Let me ask you this: what is the percentage of people who are vaccinated that suffer any ill effects? Was it 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%? What is it?
That's a great question. I don't have a definitive answer for you.
So how can let me finish here.
Okay.
So then, how can we go ahead and keep slamming the government and big pharma if we're not sure of the statistics? That seems rather irresponsible.
We are sure of one thing. We are sure of the fact that it's been documented that they have lied to us. They have been deceptive. They mitigate or
so are you saying that autism is caused by vaccinations?
Well, you know what? I'm gonna step right out here and open a can of worms. I'm going to say there's a plausible reason to believe that in many cases they have in fact contributed to that neurological disorder. In fact, there was a case. Yeah. No, wait a minute. There was a case that was determined in the vaccine court. A child named Bailey Banks, and what he had after he received several vaccinations, he actually got ADEM. His eyes rolling back in the head, seizures. Yeah. And the neurologist determined that he did have, in fact, ADEM, and his health was compromised to a degree where, he would be suffering. And I go into detail on this in the book. Now, here's a case where Master Abel determined that the child's ADEM, by the way, is acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. It was determined by Master Abel that the ADM resulted in his, as a result of the vaccinations, resulted in his pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which falls on the autism spectrum disorder. Falls within that spectrum. So there's a case where, in that one instance. Okay. That there's an issue with these vaccinations.
All right.
Resulting in a neurological disorder.
There is one case that we know of. One case.
But there's many more.
Just a second, John. Just a second.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tell me about. Would you say the Autism Society knows what they're talking about?
Well, it's funny you mention them. Autism Speaks. Is that what you're talking about?
No, the Autism Society.
Okay, now if we talk about the Autism Society, there's two sides of that fence.
I'm just asking you if they're. I understand they're an organization that is quite credible. They're above board. They have done a lot of research, And this is what they claim to be a cause of autism. There is no single cause for autism spectrum disorder, but it is generally accepted that it is caused by abnormalities in the brain structure or function. Brain scans show differences in the shape and structure of the brain in children with autism compared to neurotypical children. Researchers do not know the exact cause of autism, but are investigating a number of theories, including links among hereditary, genetics, and medical problems. In many families, there appears to be a pattern of autism or of related disabilities, further supporting the theory that the disorder has a genetic basis.
Okay, let's look at genetics. First of all, let's look at the prevalence and how it has gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 68. In some cases, in some states, it's 1 in 26. This does not account for a genetic disorder. There's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. That's not even possible.
So the Autism Society is wrong.
Well, there's a lot of societies that are wrong. There's a lot of organizations I list in my book specifically that I side with that actually do help children. And many of these foundations, by the way, that you mentioned, I'll mention Autism Speaks. I'll mention Every Child by Two. Now, these societies, they're on the side where there is nothing wrong with vaccinations. They absolutely have nothing to do with any type of neurological disorder such as autism. Where, in fact, there is study after study where we go back to simply go back to thimerosal, where there was an issue with that, and it's the studies we do. Okay, now if you're telling me that these vaccinations have nothing to do with neurological disorders such as autism, I can tell you there's no amount of studies or controls you can put together to prove that, because the best thing we can do, and Oler and Oler mentioned that in their book. And they said, we're talking about a nil hypothesis. In other words, I'll use mercury as an example, that mercury has nothing to do, and that was the thing, mercury has nothing to do with autism. Well, you can't even really make that statement and have it be plausible, because there's no studies in any amount of combination that you can show me all the ways and all the possible ways and situations and scenarios that it doesn't prove autism, and you can't do that. The best you can do is hope to show one instance where it actually does relate in neurological disorders such as autism, which has been proven in the vaccine court. And so when you do this one time, that leaves room for plausible room for possibility that there is a situation here. Now, you mentioned, okay, where there's a genetic issue. Okay, well, there is that does play a role. But I think the far bigger role is an environmental issue. Because if we look at what we're doing and what we have done in the last 30 years, we're introducing a lot of environmental toxins into our children. And I talk about some of these environmental toxins that go in, and maybe it's a synergistic effect. I think the most likely candidate is what we're doing, because we have one of the most aggressive recommended vaccine schedules in the entire country. In the world. And there's others that don't, and they don't have the situations that we have here. I think diet plays a role. I think genetically modified organisms play a role. I think aborted fetal cell lines play a role. I think there's a lot of doctors I mentioned in the book that have theories. As you say, we have a theory that make very compelling arguments, and the fact is that they're not recognized by mainstream medical situations.
Yeah, but usually when people are not recognized, there's a reason for that.
Well, there's a reason for that, and the reason for that is, it goes against the mainstream. And when we say, I'll use this as an example. I can name some of the doctors in the book here that, they say that there's an issue with these vaccinations. And, okay, I'll look at Dr. Wakefield as an example. Now, maybe he did some things wrong. Maybe he did a lot of things wrong. But he didn't really hurt anybody. All he suggested was there may be an issue with this MMR vaccine, and we needed to take a closer look at it. And it's the same thing with the Geyers, who really got lambasted and crucified because they stood out and said, no, wait a minute, this needs to be looked at. And they went in to get, do research in the Vaccine Safety Datalink, and they had to jump through hoops. And in regards to even getting in, it was almost impossible. No external research were even allowed into this safety data link until they were the first two that got in there. And once they got in there, the information they were granted was manipulated by the government, by the CDC actually, and it was misrepresented by the CDC when they went to an IOM hearing.
Oh, okay, all right. This is wonderful. This is all great, but when it comes down to push and shove,
okay,
you've got the people who you started off by saying, "Bang! It's the vaccines." Then it's now it's just it seems that what we're talking about now it's because that the what the heck's going on, Craig? Craig, can you shut that off, please?
I got a little bit of noise going on.
Yeah, we got that cleared.
Okay.
It's my big day. I thought that we were talking about. It seems like you've got something going on in your computer there, friend.
Oh, really? I don't know. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay.
We started off and we were pointing the finger at vaccines.
Okay.
Now we're pointing the finger at the environment. Do we really know, or are we just taking pot shots?
Well, no. Environmental means anything. A vaccine is environmental. Is an environmental introduction into our immune system. That's an environmental cause.
All right. So I understand that now. So why would I not believe the CDC and believe you when the CDC says vaccines do not cause autism? They say autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability that caused by differences in how the brain functions. People with ASD may communicate, interact, behave, and learn in different ways. Recent estimates from the CDC's Autism and Development Disabilities Monitoring Network found that about 1 in 68 children have been identified with ASD. In communities across the United States, CDC is committed to providing essential data on ASD, searching for the causes of and other factors that increase the risk for ASD. There is no link between vaccines and autism. Some people have had concerns that ASD might be linked to vaccines children receive, but studies have shown that there is no link between receiving vaccines and developing ASD. Why wouldn't I believe them?
Well, you know what? And I go back to history, too, and let's go back to, it was in 2000 they had a Simpsonwood hearing, and the conglomerate of the pharmaceutical companies and members from the CDC, there was an effect shown by Dr. Verstraeten that actually did show an effect between these vaccinations and thimerosal and mercury, and it was negated. It was watered down by HMOs, reduction of certain HMOs and information. But there was even at that time there was a linear and a significant statistical linear effect. But what they concluded from that was we really need to take a look more so at these vaccinations. And here we have the most aggressive vaccination schedule. And we're giving these children. Maybe you can explain to me why we're giving a hepatitis B shot to that for a sexually transmitted disease to a 6-month-old child. Maybe you can explain to me why are we giving 49 different vaccines to children before they reach age of going to school. Why are we giving 69 vaccinations to children before they're 18 years of age? I didn't get that many when I was younger. Certainly, I didn't get a tenth as many as those.
Have you asked why? And if so, what's your answer? What's the answer you're given?
Well, again, I'll go back to environmental causes, and most plausible cause is things we're injecting into our body, and it's and the thing is too. When we really take a look at these vaccines, there are studies that show that they are harmful and they are associated with neurological disorders. and especially in the case of mercury. And that's one reason, through the Modernization Act, through public concern and pressure, that the government came out and said to all these vaccine manufacturers, you have got to get rid of thimerosal in these vaccinations. And the only thing that was exempt was the flu shot. And so to this day, we still have the flu shot with thimerosal in it. Now, let's go even to Marie McCormick, who was on the Vaccine Safety Risk and Working Assessments Group with the CDC. And, you know, Dr. Goldman did a study, which I cited, and just the flu shot alone, with thimerosal, you know, the CDC didn't warn the dangers of this. They didn't account, and they categorically denied with the swine flu 2009-2010 campaign. There was a 4,250% increase in fetal in stillborn in miscarriages and stillbirths.
Sure.
So this was denied categorically by the CDC. And let's go to Kathleen Sebelius, the former Health Secretary of Human Services, and she also stated that, you know, we're not going to give any credibility to these people simply because, you know, that vaccines are proven to be safe and effective.
All right,
now if you're no, wait a minute. If you're telling me that vaccines are safe and effective, I'm going to challenge you on that because they're certainly not safe and effective.
Listen, I'm a father. I've got 6 kids. I've got 7 grandchildren. I have had all my vaccines. My kids have had their vaccines. My grandchildren have had their vaccines. Everybody I know has had the vaccines. You know what? None of them are autistic. None.
Wonderful. That's great. That's great. Now let's look at all the people that have had their shots and their child has died as a result of a baby well visit. Let's take a look at the children that actually do regress into autism after a baby well visit.
Yeah, all right. Now hold on here. Okay, I understand you're on your orange crate. You're out there. You want to make a difference. At the end of the day, are you going to make that difference?
I believe so. I believe I have. Now,
what have you done? What difference have you made?
Simply educating people, as I educated myself, on things I didn't know, things that, you know, that are hidden and not so much accentuated. And you're not going to find, by the way, you're not going to find this information going basically to the internet. You know, I spent a lot of time. I talked to a lot of different people that know what they're talking about, and they cite studies.
What's your reasoning for doing what you're doing? What's the story behind the story? What are you getting out of this?
That's it. Well, you know, okay, here I am. I'm selling a book. I'm not going to become rich off of selling the book. You know,
do you want to be looked at as an expert?
I'm sorry. What's that?
Do you want to be looked at as an expert, as a victim?
Well, no, I'm hardly an expert. I'm just a parent. I'm just a concerned parent with an autistic child.
All right, but let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
Why would a parent buy your book? You're not a doctor. You're just a person a person who has collected information. You don't have an MD. You don't have a PhD. You don't have a history of working in medical research.
Correct.
So
but I'll tell you this: neither did Stan Kurtz. Okay, and he had a son that was autistic.
Yeah.
He's not a doctor. He's not a scientist. He's not a researcher of any kind. His son had autism, and the doctors told him, "Your son will never be normal." But he didn't take that answer. He said, "No, my son will be normal," and he took steps on his own. He did research on his own. He transformed his son from you know, having severe manifestations of autism to reversing the process to the point where you would not even know that his son Ethan has autism. And so parents can make a difference. And if we look at all these individual organizations that I list in my book, not all these are doctors or scientists. And I'll be honest with you, some of these doctors and scientists, you know, and where are they getting their paychecks from? Who are they getting paid by? What motivations do they have to say what they do?
Well, let's take a look at that. All right, let's take a look at that. God forbid you're in a car accident. Do you want somebody to who's written a book on first aid to take care of you, or do you want a medical doctor who's spent 4 years in school, then went another 4 years in residency and 2 years in an emergency ward? Who would you rather have take care of you? Whose advice would you listen to?
Well, I will answer that by stating this. Doctors kill more people than anything in the United States of America.
No, sir.
They're responsible for killing up to 400,000 people a year. In some cases, they remove the wrong body part. In some cases, they leave a sponge
Why are you so anti-government? Why are you so anti-doctors? There's something hidden here. There's something that you're hiding behind, and I don't know why.
No, I'm not anti-government. I believe. Listen.
You're anti.
I'm not really. Here's my position. We have the best government in the United States and in the entire world.
And yet you say the CDC lies.
Well, they have. It's been documented they've lied.
All right. So how can you have the best government in the world? How can you have the best government in the world if the agency responsible for the welfare, I guess, of the American people has been lying to the people, and you've caught them, you've documented it?
That's correct.
So how can
but
you have
I
both?
didn't document it. This was documented before. I just brought it to light through what I found.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some things that were very, very startling.
Okay.
And I didn't know these things until I came across it. And I don't know that I need to be a doctor to read. I don't think I need to be a doctor to come across something that looks like, supported by a study to bring that to light, because these people that I write about in the book, they are experts, okay? And I cite their studies.
Yes,
I cite their research.
You see, that in itself is troubling, because you selected what you wanted in your book. You see, an author can sway any argument his or her way by what he selects or she selects to put in her book. An author is very biased. The fact that your son, and I'm very sorry to hear this, had autism, you have written a book on autism. You are using the selective research of those who support your view.
I disagree. I disagree on the fact that I do not just point my view out. I look at both sides of the issue. And this is one thing that I got help from with my my editor, Nick Bryant, who's one of the best scientific researchers in the country. He said, John, simply state the facts of everything there and let the people decide for themselves which way they want to go. I look at both sides. I cite studies from both sides. And quite frankly, this book could have been 1,000 pages long, but I wouldn't read it if it were that long. I just give people enough information, and if people just simply take the time to look at it. And you asked another question earlier. I mean, if anybody's having a child, yes, they should read this book, because within the book, I'm sorry, but parents are better doctors than doctors are for their own children. You're going to see a doctor, and you're going to spend 15 minutes with that doctor. That parent is going to spend his entire life with that child, and that parent is going to know how medications are responding to the child. He's going to know if the child gets sick. He's going to know it. He or she is going to know it first. And really, we are our own best doctors. Okay, I don't trust anybody with my health. Okay, I've taken the time, and not everybody does that. And we go into a doctor's office, and the first thing they want to do in most cases are write us a prescription for things we shouldn't even get a prescription for. And this is the way of our Western medical thinking. Now, going back to the whole point between autism and the fact that it's a humongous program, we don't have enough time to talk about all the issues in the book. It just can't be covered in an hour. It certainly can't. But we can recognize that there is, in fact, a problem. It is, in fact, documented. These aren't things I'm making up. I'm not trying to sway anybody into my corner. In fact, I would encourage anybody to read the book and correspond with me. Talk to me. Tell me where I'm wrong. Show me where I'm wrong. Just show me I cited a study that's not good. Show me a bad one. There are bad studies done on both sides of this fence. You can make a study reflect anything you want to.
That's right, you can.
And so has the government done that many, many, many times.
And yet you say, on one hand, the government has, done evil by tainting these studies. And then you say you've got a great government. So how can you have both sides of the coin showing up at the same time?
I never really got a chance to finish what I was saying. Hey, listen, we have the best system of government on the planet. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of flaws with that system, obviously.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a lot of crap, but it's the best crap we've got right now. Okay? I'll look at it that way. Okay? Maybe it's the best crap we've got right now. And there are so many things wrong. And let's look at our individual rights. those are being violated on a daily basis. And it goes right with the vaccines. And in California, it was Richard Pan who came out with legislation recently to, that mandatory vaccinations, regardless of no exemptions for children. And, and Jerry Brown is endorsing this position. And it's getting to the point where all the CDC wants to do is inoculate herd immunity now. We're collateral damage. Some people will never get autism as a result of a shot. I agree with you. Some children will never get autism as a result of a shot. I agree with that. Am I saying we shouldn't get vaccinated? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we should really have informed consent as to what these things can do to us, and we should have the right of whether we want to be vaccinated or not, and that right is being eroded on a daily basis. Children are getting hurt. Children are dying. Not all of them, granted, but some are. And it does not have to be that way. It certainly does not have to be that way. There are things we can do. And in this, it's like this show we're doing. This is beautiful. Now, I was reading something here. You got more listeners than some other shows. And you've been doing this since 1992. And you've got some great credentials to your name. And I feel very honored to be on your show. And maybe I'm not the right guy to tell you this or argue with you. Hey, listen, I'm not Moses. I don't have a stick. I don't have Aaron standing behind me here.
Neither do I.
Yeah, but I'm not a doctor. But aside from that, I can see where there's a problem. And the people that I've shared this information with me that are experts see where there's a problem. And again, it's not a matter of me choosing sides. It's just a matter of me stating historical fact. That's all I do. I state historical fact, and I state studies and how they relate to our lives.
All right. So
and how they relate to everybody else's
if all this information that you've brought into your book,
yes,
that you believe is true, and I haven't read it, so I can't make that determination.
Okay.
What I am saying, though, why the discord within the medical community? I believe, based on some information my producer found, that it's a minority of the medical community that is against vaccines and vaccination, where the majority of the medical community sees the benefits of it.
Okay, I will point this out to you. The medical community is not, the scientific community is not self-governing. They don't, govern themselves. In fact, if you take upon a study on your own, who's going to fund this study? Who's going to fund the study to point out that there may be an issue with vaccinations? Who's going to come out and do a long-term health-related study to vaccines and whatever, autism or any neurological disorder, and say, you know what, kids, you got a problem here. You're not going to get funding for it, and if you try it, you're going to get ostracized. You're going to lose your funding, and possibly lose your ability to practice. And no scientist in their right mind is going to step out and do that unless they have a conscience and they don't care what happens to them, but they actually care more so about other people.
Have you had the opportunity to speak to any of those scientists who were actually threatened with ostracization by a government agency or by Big Pharma?
Well, I've spoken with Dr. Teresa Deischer, and she's been getting some problems. And again, I mentioned her in the book. And I focus on a couple doctors that have been completely crucified, and they've never hurt anybody other than the fact that they brought it to some people's attentions and to the pharmaceuticals' attentions and the CDC's attentions that these vaccines were an issue.
Did you contact the CDC and whoever was causing problems for these doctors to get their side of the story?
This was revealed. This was revealed to a degree, to a large extent, in the Oversight Committee on Government Reform hearing in 2012, and not many people are going to take the time to go back and look at that. But it was a 3.5-hour hearing, and there were some points brought up in the written testimony that cited specific cases of this type of third rail people that take up third rail issues, such as what we're talking about here. They run into problems. It's much easier not to create waves. And so, I mean, if you're told, hey, listen, don't do that, And in the same case with Wakefield's study, they retracted his study because most of the people that backed that study, they retracted their position because they wanted to keep their jobs. And in fact, to this day, Wakefield goes around saying how bad the vaccinations are and how there is a correlation. He looks at, and I won't even get into that into great detail. I talk about that in the book. But his partner, John Walker Smith, was exonerated. And it was Judge Mitting determined that, they should really look at the General Medical Council, the ones that took their licenses away in the first place. You didn't hear a lot about that, but it was all over front pages and accusations that were genesised by a reporter named Brian Deere. And he really, he looked at all these 12 children that they did a study on, and I list that case by case in there, how these were dubious accusations. So we have a case, not just in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, where any doctor that stands out and wants to bring this to light and wants to do this, they run into problems. And again, let's look at go across the board. Look at everything. Look at the bigger picture. Look at genetically modified foods. And Arpad, who came out and said these genetically modified potatoes are doing something to these rats. We shouldn't be eating these potatoes. He lost his funding, and he was ousted. This is nothing new. All right. And a lot of people we're actually taught here in the United States and in many other places that if you don't get a vaccination, you're stupid. Okay? And that's fine. But and maybe it's just me, but I don't think it is. And maybe there are a minority of people that share a common system of beliefs as I do. But, be that what it may, these things cause harm. There's different delivery systems we could implement to make sure that if the fact we don't have to have all these toxic ingredients go into a vaccination to deliver something, an antigen, so that we can develop an immunity to a disorder or a disease.
All right, I'd just like to cut in here because I'd like to let our listeners know that they're listening to the Starcom Radio Network. My name is Rob McConnell. My guest is John Hewitt, and we're talking about John's new book entitled The Autistic Holocaust, The Reason Our Children Are Getting Sick Now. This is according to the U.S. government. Cause and risks of autism. Most scientists agree that genes are one of the risk factors that can make a person more likely to develop ASD. Children who have a sibling with ASD are at higher risk of also having ASD. ASD tends to occur more often in people who have certain genetic or chromosomal conditions, such as Fragile X syndrome or tuberculosis. When taken during pregnancy, the prescription drugs valproic acid and thalidomide have been linked with a higher risk of ASD. There is some evidence that the critical period for developing ASD occurs before, during, and immediately after birth. Children are born to older parents are at greater risk for having ASD. ASD continues to be an important public health concern. Like many families living with ASD, the CDC wants to find out what causes the disorder. Understanding the factors that make a person more likely to develop ASD will help us to learn more about the causes. So there you go. It's not as if the CDC is saying, hey, it's not my problem, who cares? It looks like, according to the research that they've done and they're continuing to do, they're taking this quite seriously, but they're adamant. They are adamant that it has nothing to do whatsoever with vaccines or Terminal.
All right. Can I address one of the points you just brought up and said the CDC cited as credible?
Yep.
Okay. Let's look at that older parents that father children. Well, there was a paper that was co-authored by Dr. Deischer called The Impact of Environmental Factors of the Prevalence of Autistic Disorders After 79. And that disputes that the IACC's possible explanation for the skyrocketing rates of autism today. The paper demonstrates that the fathers over the age of 40 had similar numbers of live births. Mm-hmm. There were similar number of live births in 1963 as they did in 2001. Okay, but the reported autism prevalence was 0.7 cases per 10,000 in 1963 compared to 79 per 10,000 in 2001. So Dr. Deischer even concluded in Sound Choice Pharmaceutical Institute that parental age was not a major trigger for autistic disorder.
That's
because
one doctor.
fathers would have been fathering as many autistic children in 1963 as 2008. Now, I'm not going to go over point by point with you, but these can be disputed by other studies. So, we need to take a look at other and say, all right, let's go back to genetics. And yes, there is an underlying issue with genetics. There is an underlying issue with bipolar. I know I have a bipolar disorder, and it's debilitating. Yeah. And I didn't know that if I had a bipolar disorder, that my son had a greater risk of coming down with an autistic spectrum disorder. You just mentioned that.
Yeah.
Schizophrenia as well. But and I'll go back to the current situation and what accounts for this situation. We're looking. What you're suggesting is a genetic epidemic. And that's just not feasibly possible in the time frame that we've seen the exponential proliferation.
Let me ask you this: is the autism problem 1 in 68 around the world, or only in the U.S.?
Well, I know in the U.S. it's 1 in 68, and it's different in different countries. We have one of the highest autism prevalence rates in the world.
Is there autism in third world countries?
Absolutely, and I mean we go to Africa, and it was brought up again in the OCGR hearing. There were tens of millions of cases of autism.
Okay, now let me ask you this. Okay, just taking that thought one step further. Did all the children or the parents in Africa receive the vaccines?
It was brought to my attention when I listened to the congressional hearing that, and it was a statement was made by Congressman Posey that said prior to the introductions of vaccines in Africa, it was never even heard of. Although we can make an argument on the other side of that accounts for the rise in autism as well, and there may be other environmental factors involved in that. You may be talking genetically. Contributory factors in that as well. And I'm not an expert on everything in the entire world, but I can tell you the rates differ in different parts of the world, and where they have the highest, the most aggressive recommended vaccine schedules, that it correlates to a higher prevalence in the autism spectrum disorders. So I can't tell you everything about Africa. I can tell you there's a very large problem with autism in Africa. This really is a pandemic problem. It's not just in the United States. It's worldwide.
Okay, but
if we look at
what I'm looking at here is you're saying that because of vaccines, this is why we're having the autism problem in the United States. This is what's causing it. And yet, there are countries that do not enforce vaccines where there are people with autism. So how can we say that the vaccines are the culprit in this case?
What we can say is that, and again, we got to look at history. We got to look at
No. Answer this question. It's a very simple question. How can we say that autism is caused by vaccinations if there are countries where people are not receiving the vaccinations and they're autistic?
We have the same thing here. We have autism that is caused, autism is going to happen, and it has happened for quite some time. But my question is, why is it such a problem now? What are we doing now that is making this rate higher and higher?
It's very simple. It's very simple.
All right.
Because the population is growing. It's simple. The more people you have, the more of anything you're going to have.
Well,
the numbers aren't going to decrease; they're going to increase.
Relative. Now, wait a minute. Everything's relative, because if we want to do it that way, then let's go back to 1970.
I hate to do this, but we're out of time for tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I don't know. I don't buy it. I really don't. I just don't buy it. I have a problem with it because there are countries on this planet that do not get any medical vaccinations whatsoever, and yet there are cases of autism. I just don't understand the logic. And I found out over the years that authors can sway. Authors write because something has ticked them off when it comes to certain topics. And this is a topic that is very dear to him because of his son and his own problems. He's looking for answers. God, I give him credit for that. He's looking for answers. But there's three sides to every story. You know this, X-Zone Nation, as well as I do. They're his side, her side, and the truth. And I think that in many cases, when it comes to trying to reason on why things are happening, like we can't say, God, why did this happen to me? In fact, many people say that no matter what happens to them, God, why is this happening to me? God had nothing to do with it. You were the result of your own actions. Cause and effect. It's that simple. I have had every one of my children vaccinated. I know my children have had their children vaccinated. All my friends have had their children vaccinated. Not one of their children, my children, or my friends' children's are autistic. By the way, before the 1940s, no one ever heard of autism. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone, a place where people dare to believe, as you've heard, and dare to be heard. And I'll be back on the other side of the top of the hour as we continue here in the X-Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, live and around the world on the Starcom Radio Network. Send me your comments. You're going to do that anyway. X-Zone at xzoneradiotv.com. I'll be back.